So the real revolutionaries in this section we're going to talk about, and when I say real revolutionary, I mean we need a lot more real revolutionaries in this day and age that are going to put it all on the line for a real reason. That we're here to stay, and we're not here to take this shit. The American colonists lived under constant duress, inflicted upon them by the British soldiers, that if they didn't obey the king's edicts or handed over any of their hard-earned resources at the king's decree, they were oppressively taxed, prevented from using alternative currencies, had their freedom of speech curtailed, and had their right to self-defense through the ownership of firearms stripped and removed. Sound familiar? There's an ongoing deliberate conspiracy to paint the American founding fathers as those who did not have the best interests of the people of the American at heart. I would highly urge for those who have subscribed to this erroneous view to research the powerful influence of the evil globalists, think tank, institutions that have crafted this nefarious and subversive psyop, which includes the Frankfurt School of Germany and the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations and the Fabian Society of England. The founding fathers and the revolutionary colonists were true dissidents of their time because they rejected the rulership of the British monarchy and physically fought the henchmen of the British royalty for their freedom. They were brutally oppressed by the psychopathic, mind-controlled order followers who traveled across an ocean at the decree of a psychopath so-called king to take away their rights. I mean, imagine this, if you want to talk about house slaves. These people were the dirtiest of the dirtiest redcoats that came around. We came across an entire ocean to oppress people that were just trying to live their lives free at the behest of some psychopathic, utter piece of trash, utter garbage piece of psychopath trash. Skinny ass little fucking punk boy. He wasn't even a grown-up man, he was just a little child trapped in a big boy's body. He was just some dirty little rat punk boy that wasn't even going to grow up to think like an individual ever. I mean, he was just about oppressing people as some boy god of himself, taking orders to go from and go oppress people who just didn't want to accept the tyranny that these dirty psychopaths wanted to create. And this is all coming from a guy who says he's a king and says he's a ruler. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell as if things could get any worse. And you're talking about a trash vermin that are following his orders and his commands, going and being his little henchmen. Both of these garbage punk boys are pieces of shit garbage for men, just as they are today, if you ask me, making money to go and do this kind of shit over people's lives, and then nothing happens. Absolutely nothing happens. So here's the piece of trash that calls himself a king, and there are still people who call themselves kings and queens in the modern day today. Their trash and garbage need to be treated like the trash and garbage that it is. They're trash. All of it. There's nothing that they're doing, these kings and queens, for the fucking people. The American colonists believe that under constant duress inflicted by them by the British soldiers, that if they didn't heed their masters' edicts, that they'd have given up all of their hazards, all of their hard-earned resources, all of their currencies, all over the king at the decree. They were oppressed, taxed heavily, prevented from using any alternative currencies, and had their freedom of speech curtailed, as I said, along with their freedom of assembly, freedom of ownership, and of self-defense. They had to have their freedoms and firearms removed. And if that's really what started the American Revolution, is just that in and of itself. People were not going to take having their firearms removed coming from a tyrannical government that was just, oh, firearms on you. And the firearms were up. And the firearms were on. The brigade was strong. Just like it's going to be going on again today if this shit doesn't actually supersede and people start waking up to realize what is actually going on. You can see it, everyone can see it, and you know it like I know it. You know it like the sun is coming up in the eastern horizon and the clouds are not. You know it's your name. You know it like you know your name. You know it like you know the back of your own hand. When they start against this tyrannical enslavement that we call the modern government today, because they are already doing this, folks, and no one is still wanting to wake up about any of it. No one still wants to wake up and set the country free from the current living state of war that we're currently in here in America, because people are just too blind to see it for what it is. Or maybe they just do see it and they don't want anything to do about it. They don't want to do anything about it. Because people that want to take your freedoms away are not going to go quietly in the night. These children people want to be able to take away your firearms so you have nothing left to defend your rights. And I'll tell you that with 100% assurance, because that's the same damn system of the highly treasonous and tyrannical crimes that have been happening to me my whole life, not protecting me from fucking dick one of them. And we're not going to get the job done in this country without a little bloodshed if you're not willing to take up stakes, the claims, like to the teeth about these claims. You want to take up claims in any other way, and you're in over your heads. That's all I'm going to point out. People are in over their heads, and I'm trying to overt that energy into people because it's not going to come up real nicely for people if people don't wisen up and start understanding natural law and teaching it as widely as possible. There's an ongoing deliberate conspiracy to paint the American founding fathers as those who did not have the best interests of the people of American people at heart. And that's just it in a nutshell. Founding fathers and revolutionaries physically repelled against a standing army amongst them because they had no option but to fight and kill or die to secure their rights and their rights of prosperity, their right to seek anything in their lives, because they were under constant duress. So I need for people to understand this stuff because of the ways that people want to deflect of what's going on in my own life. We have already entered into a situation that may require the same necessary use of defense and force. A growing militia needs to be a growing militia when it comes against the conspiracies that are happening, conspiracy facts, because they point out the deliberate fact of conspiracy just to misconstrue the facts that are. That's what they created the word for. It's a Central Intelligence Agency that created that lie in the first place. That's to paint the American founding fathers as those who did not have the best interests of the people, when they actually did. And they did. I would highly urge for those who have subscribed to that kind of thought to really do go back and look at what the Tavistock Institute was, Frankfurt School of Germany, and all these other places where the occultism stems from. If you don't understand these institutions, you don't understand how this mind control operates. You don't understand how the PSYOP is. You don't understand how false flag events work. You don't understand how they can pay people to be to end up targeting people being perpetrators of the crimes. That was all crafted back in the modern world. When we were supposedly won the war, we didn't win the war. People didn't push far enough because what we did was invited the Nazi regimes into here to utilize their Stasi style of policing. And you need to learn something about it if you're going to be particularly educated on institutions that are trying to break your freedoms while so-called educating you on resources and availability of those rights to be protected. Because your rights aren't being protected, which are all Fabian and socialist owned and run. They're more like the Fabiist orders from Tavistock. And then taking orders, quite honestly, these fascist ideas, that's all they are. All these Nazis and fascists that want to be all communistic are so different because they all want to curtail freedom of speech, or they're not so different at all because they all want to curtail freedom of speech and control the resources of the people to make them into basic abject slaves to a tyrannical system that's oppressing them constantly, never allowing them to actually be free. No, they don't want to allow people to actually get free, actually have free press and free enterprise, because the left wing and the right wing are so different from one another, right? They're so unique and different from one another, and they're both so we're so different that we have to constantly believe all these puppet shows on the string. It's two wings of the same predatory bird of prey. The same government that seems to disenfranchise its people, and it offends everybody. If you ask me, it offends me. My own intelligence of how humanity could look or how humanity could be today, it's well psyopted into portray conspiracy as fact, not as a theory, but as conspiracy facts. And instead portraying the founding fathers as being bad people, is to just dissuade people from looking at the writings of the founding fathers themselves, discovering what they were actually saying. And especially like Thomas Paine, Samuel Adams, who wrote some of the highest conscious philosophy ever written in the continent, besides that of Jesus Christ's very own words. The fact of the matter, however, that if you haven't been reading any of their writings or studying any of their work, you have to start reading some of their writings and studying some of their work. I mean, these guys knew what they're talking about. And I don't know why they're taking these people out of school systems. They're not just playing games here. They're playing with people's lives. The future of what they can actually gain from the resources of education. The actual resources that they're supposed to gain to be able to protect themselves against a tyrannical government, being, as said, that a government does grow up around them to build up a big old superpower. And then, in that case, it's doing nothing but strangling the people that it's supposed to be protecting. Both men and women and all children. And especially children. Another part of this psyop is to discredit the philosophy and the writings of Thomas Jefferson, the writer of the Declaration, because he was a slave owner, and so that's what people go on, is like, he was a slave owner. While this was true, Jefferson worked tirelessly to try and have the practice of slavery abolished, and even his own slave was free as free could be on his property, made him feel as welcome as it was his own home. He called the practice of slavery a moral depravity and a hideous blot upon society, and continuously worked towards absolution, or abolition, which means to get rid of it completely. He wrote anti-slavery clauses into the Declaration of Independence in the first place, but then the delegates of the southern colonies, led by the South Carolina Representative Edward Rutledge, threatened to strike down the motion of the American Independence Committee at the Second Continental Congress if the anti-slavery clauses that Jefferson did not willfully on his own accord remove. He was forced to remove them before submitting them again. The anti-slavery clauses were then removed from the original draft of the Declaration of Independence. Actually, Rutledge gathered up all of the delegates of all of the southern colonies, and they walked out of Independence in a hall in Philadelphia, like en masse, in a big, huge. The reason I mention that they were slave owners is because I will mention that they were flawed men who did not have all of the answers to all of life's questions, to all of life's concerns, and they didn't have all of the answers. But the true anarchy in that fact is that all human beings have the same rights. They are endowed to us by our Creator to remain unharmed and unenslaved, unhampered in our abilities to progress forward. So you also have to remember that in this state, it was punishable by death to release a slave indefinitely. And it's because they did not consider them human beings as looked at as though you and I are supposedly looked at as human beings. But I beg to differ. I believe that they've already unleashed beasts into this society already. And no, people are not treated as equals at where they go in life. No matter where they go in life. If you're a targeted individual, you're a targeted individual no matter where you go. That's just utterly how fucked up their thinking of these things are. Maybe you should have been jailed or put to death by the act of trying to release a slave back then, but I say whatever. He should have done it anyway. I'm not making any excuses for why he didn't do it or why he made the contract with the Second Continental Congress before he left. But upon his return, I believe he would have freed slaves and worked tirelessly to do that very thing. And he did. He was involved in anti-slavery, abolitionists, colonists, and worked tirelessly to free slaves. And then he constantly advocated for this in the state of Virginia. So, it's a very interesting thing in the story of the Declaration of Independence when you look into it more deeply, because you realize that you have to not also understand the clashed emotions and all of that was happening during these coalitions, where these southern states were very vehemently wanting to keep the practice of slavery in its place. Benjamin Franklin and John Adams had vehement arguments with Thomas Jefferson, who said, essentially, screw them, stating it just as I wrote it. But he's not just striking at these clauses that were originally placed in the writing because slavery is immoral. Both Jefferson and Adams said we have to secure independence first, and yes, it's a blot upon our society that they agreed. But they said if either of these rich men who were wrongly using these humans as their own, their mandatory system of their labor for their crops to have grown, sell worldwide so they can block out commodities as Americans who are big men and could make others go through all of that hard labor for their own ill-gotten gain, as if other people with heartbeats aren't even living beings. Way to go, America. We will never begin this real country, and it will die right here in this committee and right here on this Continental Congress if we aren't begged to move and willfully move to remove these ways that are happening currently still today. They begged to remove the willfully agreed upon clauses and finally capitulated that when the southern states came back into delegation and they agreed to pass the independence and sign the Declaration of Independence. But how many people knew that in history? And you're right, it's far too little because people are simply not being taught that in the schools in these days. These neo-Marxists, so-called educators who wanted to create race division in the first place, didn't really want people out there speaking out about how they moved into society to end the racial division in the country long time before they ever started even like moving on it. But the whole reason that George Soros created Black Lives Matter wasn't to suggest that Black lives mattered. It was to just create more race division, even within Black lives or Black people's lives. So most people don't want to see these things to recognize even about what the Founding Fathers were really writing about. So they want to point at them as old rich white men that didn't want to really even care about their existing in a fashion to care about the practices of slavery so much more that were going on in that time period in this very statement. And that is in fact very untrue. With that being said, the Southern delegates were fucking bastards. Yes. And they held vehemently on this immoral practice. Sure. Edward Rutledge was probably the most vehemently among them because he was probably the most young and rich among them, slave owners, because he had probably profited the most on this practice, so of course he wanted to keep that practice alive and well. And for Christ's sake, folks, for the same special places that are reserved in hell for this kind of vermin are the same people that are everywhere today. And he was also a singer of the he was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence. You want to talk about a piece of trash? That's the piece of trash that wanted to help keep and perpetuate this practice in this country to the point where you know where we're at today, perpetually and partially still about it. Rowdy about it, if you ask me. That's how I feel the state is. That's how I feel the state of what my life has just been led into because of what I know. Sure. So although it wasn't currently and entirely just about that, but you have to understand that these Northern Founding Fathers, they wanted to abolish the practice right then and there, but they couldn't. They couldn't get everybody under that same banner, under that same decree, because of the same kind of banner that's going on today. They all need their selfish ass means, and they want to hide it in their so-called ways that they're going to be doing so much more for the country while the country is further and further decimated because they don't understand what they're doing. They don't. Well, more or less, no, they do understand what they're doing. It's narcissism at its finest. Again, yeah, educational resource and the people willing to put forth that kind of truth out there have to be much bigger than whatever else is out there, right? And that's what the great work is in this world right now, is getting people on that plane of thought that you all are way better than they. You all can do way better than they. And to get work, why aren't you getting to work on it? Your mind is beautiful. There's art. Your hearts are beautiful. There's art. So why are people decimated in their own attempts to realize and understand their own realities, a whole lot more about their own histories, and how we have some practices to align and some kind of defenses against the state, against the systems of huge problems that are having, real fucking problems in this country. I'll say pretty huge problems, fair enough to say. Well, it's well known. Wouldn't you think? It's well known that we have problems in this country. The attempts of strong, willful men to create those channels and avenues of change in the world. True patriots versus deadly patriots, basically, which is what we're going to talk on next. But for now, I'm going to leave this one at that. I hope to see you on my next one. Thanks for being here. It really means a lot to me that you are here. Thank you for supporting me along the way, riding through the storms, the highs and lows, come what may. Come for the holding me up, and the world seems to fall. You had enough for every word you spoke and every prayer you sent. I'm grateful for the comments and the shares you give, the likes and the vents that you spirit. But don't give up. In the darkest of night, nights, now we're shining up together. Through the darkest nights, we're glowing up together in the light. Thank you for giving me your utmost support and love when nobody showed me their utmost. Walking with me steady on this winding road, standing by my side when the storm clouds arose. Your faith in me when it's more than gold. Turned away, you couldn't turn away and let me drown in the spirit. You know the most, never put me down. Through the highs and lows, through the fires and rains, you lifted me up, brought me back from the pain. When I finally was feeling enough, pain, feeling weak, spoke the truth when I could hardly speak. Every time I fall, reminding me of the times to rise. Thanking for you for all the tears in my eyes now. Thank you for your utmost support you gave, for the love that you showed, never walking away. Thank you for standing tall by my side when the storms, clouds, rose. Down this winding road, faith in me, yeah, it's been more than gold to me. For every compliment, every like, every word you said, so much to me. Every heartbeat, like a torch, a friend you make me see. When times get hard, make you feel hurt. Every single post, every single word, and every promise to this, as long as I breathe, I'll keep on sharing this love fantasy.